Hey, Drew here with Plot First, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to be reviewing not one, but two different stories that are actually the same story. So, obviously, you probably know this if you clicked on the thumbnail, but I'm going to be talking about Bombshell, which was a film that came out last year, and I'm going to be talking about The Loudest Voice, which was a series that aired on Showtime last year. Now, both are telling the story of Roger Ailes and the sexual harassment scandals that he was the perpetrator of at Fox News. But both have a very different focus, and I would argue that Bombshell is a great movie because of the focus it shows and the way it chose to represent its characters, and The Loudest Voice is not a good show because of the focus it chose and the way it chose to represent its characters. But what am I talking about? So in The Loudest Voice, I'll start with the Papa Bear example. The Loudest Voice stars Russell Crowe as Roger Ailes, and it traces his journey at Fox News from when he first showed up and how he sort of started to give the network direction and how he pushed it to what it has become today. And it follows him and his wife, played by Sienna Miller, and their journey at the network. Now, I think that this is a mistake because the series does not view Roger Ailes as a good person. It obviously hates him from the very moment that he steps on screen. He's portrayed as nothing but odious. And this reminds me a lot of a recent film that Christian Bale starred in called Vice, which couldn't win Christian Bale an Oscar despite his breathtaking performance as Dick Cheney. But the problem with that film is the same problem that The Loudest Voice has, which is that it hates the person that it's portraying so much that it gives the viewer nothing to anchor it as they watch. If you watch The Loudest Voice, I guarantee you will be confused as to what you're supposed to care about, because it kind of almost feels like a documentary, except that a lot of the facts in this miniseries are made up, so I really don't know what people are supposed to come away from it feeling engaged by. It's just a very meh experience. Naomi Watts was good as Gretchen Carlson, but otherwise, I just didn't find a lot to like. It ultimately won Russell Crowe a Golden Globe for playing Roger Ailes, but, they're the Golden Globes, what can you say? Bombshell, in contrast, takes the same story, and it tells the story from the perspective not of Roger Ailes, who in this version is played by John Lithgow, but from the perspective primarily of Megyn Kelly, played by Charlize Theron, in an Oscar-nominated role, and Nicole Kidman, who is playing Gretchen Carlson. And it also features a fictionalized character played by Margot Robbie, who's kind of playing an amalgamation of all the women that Roger Ailes might have harassed. But putting the focus on the women makes this a much, much more compelling story. And the reason for that is, while acknowledging that these women were conservatives, which is good because I don't think the people who made this movie were conservatives, but they're acknowledging these people for who they were, not trying to sugarcoat it. They definitely portray some of the things that Megyn Kelly has done and said that were a turnoff to liberals, but they're able to portray them as somewhat heroic. They're able to show how they had these strengths that they demonstrated as they sought to take down Roger Ailes, and it gives the audience a center where they can view the Fox News story from, and they can root for somebody in the midst of all of this. In contrast, you just don't know what you're supposed to root for. At the end of The Loudest Voice, when Roger Ailes finally gets taken out and pushed out of the network, you're confused because you've been following this character the whole time. So you're not really sure how you're supposed to feel. In Bombshell, when Roger Ailes is finally kicked out of the network, it feels good because you're rooting for the women to finally be able to push him out and to get justice for what's happened to them. Both films have a lot of politics going on. They have a lot of political baggage. From my perspective, you could watch Bombshell as a conservative and potentially not get offended if you went in with an open mind and realized that a criticism of Fox News is not inherently a criticism of conservatives. After all, Gretchen Carlson and Megyn Kelly were both quite conservative. But in the case of The Loudest Voice, to me it came off as just a takedown of conservatives across the board, and I didn't like that. I feel like if you're going to tell a story, you need to be even-handed. You need to find something to like in all your characters, regardless of whether or not you agree with them on their politics. Bombshell is also just a vastly superior film from the directing standpoint, from the writing standpoint, and from the music. The Loudest Voice really didn't have good dialogue, it was very exposition laden, and it didn't really have a lot of character development other than telling you how terrible Roger Ailes was the whole time. This story's Roger Ailes, played by John Lithgow, is actually a lot more sympathetic. Maybe he shouldn't be sympathetic, but I think they at least made an effort to try to understand him in Bombshell and to give an audience an understanding of exactly what kind of monster he was. The film, oddly enough, Bombshell, is directed by the person who brought you Meet the Parents and the Austin Powers movies, so he's moved up in the world, kind of following a similar trajectory to the director of The Big Short and Vice, where he's moved away from his comic roots and made some pretty serious movies. The makeup and hairstyling in Bombshell deservedly won an Oscar, and I say deservedly because it's remarkable how much they managed to transform Charlize Theron and some of the other actors to look like their real-life counterparts. I think the performances were great. I would have loved to see Bombshell nominated for Best Picture last year. I think it was very, very deserving. And I can think of a couple films that I think were less deserving than Bombshell. But that's just my thoughts. What did you think of Bombshell if you've seen it? If you haven't seen it yet, I would point out that it's coming to rent on March 10th, so Tuesday. So if you want to rent it, I think you should. I think it was great. And I would highly recommend not watching The Loudest Voice because it was boring, not factual, and it didn't really give you a whole lot of insight into the characters, and it was just kind of a political takedown. So that's my take on The Loudest Voice and Bombshell. But as I was going to say, what did you think? Did you think that the politics of Bombshell were still abrasive, or did you think it did a pretty even-handed job of telling the tale? Do you think that it's a bad thing that The Loudest Voice made Roger Ailes so unsympathetic? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new to the channel and if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing.